The screech of wagon wheels grinding to a halt broke the morning silence as Susannah Collins stared at the two-story house she once called home. Dust swirled around her threadbare skirts, the Wyoming Territory sun beating down mercilessly as she clutched a single carpet bag containing all her worldly possessions. After 5 years of marriage and 3 failed pregnancies, her husband Thomas had finally declared what everyone in Sheridan had been whispering for years: she was barren, useless as a wife, and no longer welcome in his home. April 1878 had turned out to be the cruelest month of Susannah's 24 years. The doctor's final pronouncement still rang in her ears. "There's something not right with your womb, Mrs. Collins. I'm afraid you'll never bear children." Thomas hadn't waited a day before packing her things and arranging for her passage to her aunt's home in Montana. Except Susannah had refused to board that stagecoach. Somehow, being cast aside had awakened something fierce within her. She'd stepped down from the stage right here in Sheridan, determined to make her own way rather than become another relative's burden. "You sure this is where you want me to leave you, madam?" the wagon driver asked, eyeing the shabby boarding house before them with undisguised concern. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Peterson." Susannah handed him the last of her coins. "This will do just fine." The truth was, Susannah had nowhere else to go. Mrs. Hildebrand's boarding house was the only place in town she could afford with her meager savings, a dreary establishment on the edge of Sheridan, Wyoming, where respectable women rarely ventured alone. Mrs. Hildebrand, a stern-faced widow with sharp eyes, looked Susannah up and down suspiciously when she entered. "You're Thomas Collins's wife, aren't you?" "I was," Susannah replied, her chin lifting slightly. "We're no longer together." Understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes. "Heard about your troubles. Word travels fast in Sheridan." She paused, then added more gently, "I've got a small room at the back. $5 a week includes 1 meal a day." "I'll take it," Susannah said, though she had only enough money to last 2 weeks at most. "And I'm looking for work if you know of anything suitable." Mrs. Hildebrand's laugh was without humor. "Suitable in this town? For a woman alone?" She shook her head. "The saloon's always hiring girls, but I don't suppose that's what you mean." "No," Susannah said firmly. "I can sew, cook, clean. I'm educated. I taught school before my marriage." "Well, there's the mercantile. Old man Jenkins might need help. His daughter ran off with a cattle driver last month." Mrs. Hildebrand shrugged. "Or try the hotel. They sometimes need laundry girls." Susannah nodded, determined. "I'll try both places tomorrow." Her room was barely larger than a closet, just space enough for a narrow bed, a wobbly table with a cracked basin, and a single hook on the wall for her clothes. The one window looked out at the back of the livery stable. As night fell, Susannah sat on the edge of her bed, allowing herself one brief moment of tears before straightening her shoulders. She would survive this. She had to. Morning brought no relief from Susannah's anxieties. The mercantile had no openings, and Mr. Jenkins had eyed her with barely concealed disdain when she mentioned her situation. "Sorry, Mrs. Collins, but I need someone reliable, someone permanent." The hotel manager had been more direct. "We don't hire divorced women. Sets a bad example." "I'm not divorced," Susannah had protested. "My husband and I have separated." "Even worse," the man had replied, turning away. By midday, Susannah was desperate enough to consider the laundry at the edge of town, where the work was backbreaking and the pay barely enough to survive on. As she made her way there, a commotion near the bank caught her attention. A group had gathered to watch as several cowboys rode in, trailing a herd of cattle that would be loaded onto the railroad heading east. Cattle drives weren't unusual in Sheridan, but this one seemed to be causing particular interest. Susannah paused, curious despite her troubles. "That's the Eastman ranch hands," a woman beside her remarked to her companion. "And that there's Owen Eastman himself, leading them in. Finest cattle operation in the territory, they say." Susannah followed the woman's gaze to a tall man astride a magnificent chestnut stallion. Unlike the dusty, rough-looking cowboys surrounding him, Owen Eastman wore a clean white shirt under his leather vest, though his hat was as weathered as any working man's. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines that spoke of both laughter and hardship. He couldn't have been more than 30, yet there was an authority about him that made the other men, some clearly older, defer to him without question. "Heard he bought the old Mac Gregor place too," the woman continued. 3,000 acres, and him with no wife to share it. "Probably too busy building his empire to court a woman," her friend replied with a laugh. "Though half the unmarried ladies in town would throw themselves at him given half a chance." Susannah was about to continue on her way when Owen Eastman's gaze suddenly met hers across the street. For a moment, neither looked away. There was something in his deep blue eyes, a recognition, perhaps, though they'd never met. Then someone called his name, and the moment was broken. Shaking off the strange encounter, Susannah continued to the laundry. By sunset, her hands were raw from lye soap and hot water, but she had secured work 3 days a week washing linens from the hotel and saloon. The pay was pitiful, but it would keep her at Mrs. Hildebrand's, at least for now. The next week passed in a blur of exhaustion. When she wasn't at the laundry, Susannah took in mending from Mrs. Hildebrand's other boarders, mostly single men who worked at the lumber mill or on the railroad. Her fingers were constantly pricked and stained, but every coin helped. She avoided the main streets when possible, unable to bear the pitying glances or outright snubs from women who had once called themselves her friends. The worst was encountering Thomas outside the bank one afternoon. He'd pretended not to see her, turning abruptly to engage a business associate in conversation. On Sunday, when most of the town was at church, Susannah allowed herself a walk by the river. The early May sunshine had brought wildflowers blooming along the banks, and for a moment she could almost forget the mess her life had become. She sat on a fallen log, removed her worn boots, and dipped her aching feet in the cool water. Careful there. Current's stronger than it looks this time of year. Susannah startled, nearly slipping from her perch. Owen Eastman stood a few yards away, leading his horse to drink downstream. Without his cowboys and cattle surrounding him, he seemed less imposing, though still undeniably handsome in a rugged way. "I'm sorry to have frightened you, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "You didn't," Susannah lied, quickly withdrawing her feet from the water and tugging her skirts down. It was highly improper to be showing her ankles to a stranger, though out here by the river, such concerns seemed trivial. "Owen Eastman," he said, not moving closer, as if sensing her discomfort. "Susannah Collins," she replied, then immediately regretted giving her married name. Soon enough he'd hear the gossip if he hadn't already. "You're new to Sheridan?" he asked, allowing his horse to graze nearby. "No," she answered. "I've lived here 5 years, though I've kept mostly to myself." It wasn't entirely true, but it explained why they hadn't crossed paths before. Owen nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I'm only in town a few times a year myself. Bring the cattle in for shipping, stock up on supplies, then back to the ranch." "It must be lonely," Susannah said, then blushed at her forwardness. To her relief, Owen didn't seem offended. He smiled, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. "Sometimes, but there's a peace to it too, just the land, the animals, and the sky." He gestured toward the rolling hills beyond the river. My place is about 15 miles southwest, best grazing land in the territory. You must be proud of what you've built, Susannah said, genuinely impressed. She knew enough about the territory to understand that successful ranchers were as much respected as the bankers and lawyers in town. Getting there, he acknowledged. But a ranch that size needs more hands than I've got. Actually came into town hoping to hire a few more men before summer. He paused, studying her. Forgive me for saying so, Mrs. Collins, but you look like someone who could use a change of fortune. Susannah stiffened. I'm doing just fine, Mr. Eastman. Of course, he said quickly. I didn't mean to presume, it's just. He hesitated, then continued, I need someone to cook for the ranch hands. Previous cook broke his leg, won't be back till fall if then. It's hard work, but the pay's fair, and there's a small cabin for whoever takes the position. Susannah stared at him, wondering if this was some kind of cruel joke. You're offering me a job as a cook on your ranch. I am, he said simply. 3 meals a day for anywhere from 8 to 15 men, depending on the season. Sundays off. $20 a month plus room and board. It was more money than she'd make in 3 months at the laundry, and the promise of her own cabin a home, however humble, made her breath catch. But suspicion quickly followed. Why would you offer such a position to a woman you just met? A respectable ranch would usually hire a man for that role. Owen's expression remained earnest. True enough. But my mother was the best cook in Colorado Territory before she passed, and she always said women brought a sense of home to a place that men couldn't manage alone. He smiled again. Besides, I've eaten Hank Miller's cooking for 2 weeks now, and I'm not sure my stomach can take much more. Despite everything, Susannah found herself smiling back. I'm a good cook, Mr. Eastman, but there are things you should know about me before making such an offer. If you're referring to your separation from Thomas Collins, I already know, he said quietly. Sheridan's a small town, Mrs. Collins. Susannah felt heat rise to her cheeks. Then you also know why. I know what people say, Owen replied carefully, but I've learned that town gossip is rarely the whole truth. In this case it is, Susannah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't have children. My husband felt justified in setting me aside for it. Owen was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, a man's worth isn't measured just by the children he fathers, Mrs. Collins, and a woman's worth isn't measured just by the children she bears. He picked up his horse's reins. The job offer stands. I'll be at the hotel until Tuesday morning if you decide to accept. With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Susannah staring after him, wondering if she had imagined the entire encounter. That night, Susannah barely slept. The prospect of leaving Sheridan, escaping the whispers and pitying glances, was tempting beyond measure. But living on a remote ranch with a group of cowboys, it wasn't the sort of position a respectable woman took, even one whose reputation was already damaged. By morning, though, practicality won out. Her money was almost gone. The work at the laundry was destroying her hands and would never pay enough for her to truly support herself. And something about Owen Eastman's direct gaze and simple offer had struck her as trustworthy. Monday afternoon found Susannah approaching the Sheridan Hotel with trepidation. She had packed her few belongings and given notice to Mrs. Hildebrand, who had seemed unsurprised by her decision. Can't say I blame you for getting out of town, the landlady had said. Nothing here for a woman alone except hard work and harder judgment. The hotel clerk directed Susannah to the small dining room, where Owen sat alone with a cup of coffee and what appeared to be account books. He stood when he saw her, his expression brightening. Mrs. Collins, I'm glad you came. I'd like to accept your offer, Mr. Eastman, Susannah said, her voice steadier than she felt. But I have conditions. Owen gestured for her to sit. I'm listening. I'll cook 3 meals a day, 6 days a week, as you said. I'll keep the kitchen clean and orderly. But I won't be doing personal laundry for you or your men, and I expect to be treated with respect at all times. She took a deep breath. And I want it understood that this is a professional arrangement only. Owen nodded, his expression serious. Those terms are entirely reasonable, Mrs. Collins. I can assure you that my men are well disciplined. Any disrespect toward you would be grounds for immediate dismissal. He offered his hand across the table. Do we have an agreement? Susannah hesitated only briefly before shaking his hand. His palm was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked alongside his hired hands despite being the owner. We do, Mr. Eastman. Good, he said with a smile. We leave at first light tomorrow. I've got the wagon for supplies. There's room for you and your belongings. I don't have much, Susannah admitted. Just 1 bag. Something flickered in Owen's eyes, perhaps pity, perhaps something else, but he simply nodded. 1 bag is fine. Sometimes it's easier to start fresh with less weighing you down. The journey to the Eastman ranch took the better part of a day. Owen drove the wagon himself, with 2 of his Hands brothers named Jim and Pete riding alongside on horseback. Susannah sat beside Owen on the wagon bench, maintaining a proper distance despite the jostling of the rough trail. At first, conversation was sparse and awkward. Susannah had never spent so much time alone in a man's company, not even her husband's. But as the miles passed and the town gave way to open country, Owen proved to be an amiable companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the territory. My father brought us out here from Illinois when I was just 12, he told her as they crossed a shallow stream. Had the dream of building something that would last generations. He didn't live to see it happen. Pneumonia took him the second winter, but my mother and I stuck it out. That must have been difficult, Susannah said, thinking of her own comfortable upbringing in Pennsylvania. It was, Owen acknowledged, but Mother was tough as nails, taught me everything I know about ranching. When she passed 3 years ago, she left me a good foundation to build on. She sounds remarkable, Susannah said, genuinely impressed. My mother taught me to embroider handkerchiefs and pour tea properly. Owen laughed, the sound rich and warm. Well, I can guarantee none of my cowboys will notice if you pour their coffee properly or not, as long as it's hot and strong. By mid-afternoon, they crested a rise and Owen pulled the wagon to a halt. There it is, he said, a note of pride in his voice. Eastman Ranch. Spread out below them was a verdant valley cradled between rolling hills. A creek wound through the center, bordered by cottonwoods. Near the creek stood a cluster of buildings, a large 2-story main house built of logs and stone, several outbuildings, a barn and corrals. In the distance, cattle grazed on the lush spring grass. It's beautiful, Susannah said, meaning it. After weeks in her dingy boarding house room, the sight of open space and greenery made her heart lift. That's your place, Owen said, pointing to a small cabin set slightly apart from the bunkhouse. It's not fancy, but it's solid. Used to be the foreman's cabin before I built him a bigger place for his family. As they approached, Susannah could see that while the cabin was indeed small, it appeared well maintained, with a small porch and actual glass windows, a luxury on the frontier. When they finally arrived, Owen helped her down from the wagon with a gentle hand at her elbow, then carried her bag to the cabin door. I'll leave you to get settled, he said, setting the bag just inside. Kitchen's in the main house. Cook usually starts breakfast around 5. Any questions before I go? Susannah gazed around the cabin. One room with a bed, a table and chair, a small dresser, and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. It was simple but clean, with a colorful quilt on the bed and curtains at the windows that someone had taken time to hang. "No questions," she said, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's journey and the enormity of the change she had made. "Thank you, Mr. Eastman." "Owen," he corrected gently. "Out here we're not much for formalities." He tipped his hat. "Welcome to the ranch, Susannah." The first weeks at Eastman Ranch passed in a blur of activity. Cooking for a dozen hungry cowboys was exhausting work, but Susannah found satisfaction in it. The men were initially awkward around her, some overly polite, others barely speaking, but as they discovered her skill in the kitchen, they warmed to her presence. Her biscuits, in particular, earned her a reputation that spread even to neighboring ranches. Owen proved to be a fair employer. He ate with his men, taking no special privileges despite being the owner, and always thanked Susannah for her efforts. She noticed he was often the first up and the last to bed, working alongside everyone else during the day but spending evenings with his account books and correspondence. Gradually, Susannah settled into the rhythm of ranch life. Her Sundays off became precious time for herself. Sometimes she would walk along the creek, gathering wildflowers or simply enjoying the peace. Occasionally, she would see Owen at a distance on these walks, but he always respected her privacy, offering only a wave or tip of his hat. One Sunday in late June, however, broke the pattern. Susannah had walked further than usual, following the creek to a small waterfall she'd heard the men mention. The day was hot, and the sight of the clear, cool water was too tempting to resist. Checking to ensure she was truly alone, Susannah removed her shoes and stockings and lifted her skirts just enough to wade into the shallow pool at the base of the falls. The relief was immediate, the cool water soothing against her skin. Susannah closed her eyes, savoring the moment, a rare feeling of freedom. "I see you found Cottonwood Falls." Susannah's eyes flew open. Owen stood at the edge of the clearing, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I can go." "No, it's all right," Susannah said, though she quickly stepped out of the water, embarrassed to be caught in such an informal state. "I was just cooling off. It's your land, after all." Owen stayed where he was, giving her space to collect herself. "It's a good spot for it. My mother used to bring me here when I was a boy." He smiled at the memory. She said it was the one place on the ranch where she could pretend she was back in Illinois, where waterfalls and shade trees were easier to come by. Susannah finished putting on her stockings and shoes, then straightened. "Your mother sounds like she was an adaptable woman." "She was," Owen agreed. He hesitated, then asked, "Would you mind company on your walk back? I've been meaning to speak with you, and this seems like a good opportunity." A flutter of anxiety passed through Susannah. Had she done something wrong? Was he dissatisfied with her work? "Of course," she managed to say. They walked in silence for a few minutes, following the creek back toward the ranch buildings. Finally, Owen spoke. "The men have been talking about the 4th of July celebration. Normally, we all ride into Sheridan for the day, but several mentioned they'd rather stay here if there was to be a special dinner." He glanced at her. "I told them I'd ask if you were willing. It would mean working on your day off, but I'd compensate you extra." Relief washed over Susannah. "I'd be happy to prepare a special dinner. I used to make quite an elaborate spread for holidays when—" She trailed off, not wanting to mention her marriage. Owen nodded, understanding her unspoken words. "I'd provide whatever supplies you need, and of course, you join us for the meal." "The men would like that." "Would they?" Susannah asked, surprised. She had maintained a cordial but distant relationship with the ranch hands, serving their meals but rarely joining in their conversations. "They would," Owen confirmed. "You've become something of a favorite around here. Jim and Pete were saying just yesterday that the food alone is reason enough to stay on through winter this year." Susannah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer sun. It had been so long since she'd felt valued for anything she did. In that case, I'd be delighted to cook for the celebration. Owen's smile brightened his whole face. Excellent. I'll have Miguel bring back whatever supplies you request when he goes to town on Wednesday. He paused, then added more softly, and for what it's worth, I'm glad you won't have to spend the holiday in Sheridan. Some memories are better left undisturbed. Susannah glanced at him sharply. You know about last year's 4th celebration? Owen's expression grew serious. I heard things. That Thomas made quite a scene at the town picnic when you left early feeling ill. That it was after that day he started telling people about your difficulties. He looked away, clearly uncomfortable discussing such personal matters. It's true, Susannah admitted, surprised to find she could speak of it without the usual wave of shame. I'd lost our 3rd baby just 2 weeks before. The doctor had finally told us there wouldn't be others, but Thomas insisted we attend the celebration as if nothing had happened. When I became overwhelmed and asked to leave, he refused, so I walked home alone. She took a deep breath. By morning, everyone in town knew why the Collins marriage was failing. They had reached the edge of the yard. Owen stopped, turning to face her. Thomas Collins is a fool, he said quietly, his blue eyes intense. A man who discards his wife for something beyond her control doesn't deserve the name of husband. Susannah didn't know how to respond. No one, not her friends, not even her family back east, had defended her so plainly. Thank you, she finally said, but the law and the church both support his decision. The law and the church aren't always right, Owen replied. Where I stand, a marriage is about partnership, not just producing heirs. Before Susannah could respond, one of the hands called to Owen from the barn, breaking the moment. Owen gave her an apologetic smile. Duty calls, but think about what you'd like for the 4th celebration. Sky's the limit. As he walked away, Susannah found herself watching him with new eyes. Owen Eastman was unlike any man she'd ever known, straightforward yet kind, hardworking yet thoughtful. For the first time, she wondered what it might be like to be truly partnered with such a man, rather than merely possessed as she had been by Thomas. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. The 4th of July celebration exceeded everyone's expectations. Susannah had outdone herself with fried chicken, fresh bread, 3 types of pie, and all the fixings. The Cowboys had constructed long tables under the cottonwoods, and someone had even found bunting in the attic to decorate. As twilight approached, the men broke out instruments of fiddle, harmonica, and guitar and began to play. One of the younger hands, a boy named Caleb who couldn't have been more than 19, asked Susannah to dance. Before she could decide how to respond, Owen appeared at her side. I believe Mrs. Collins promised me the first dance, he said smoothly, offering his hand. Susannah had promised no such thing, but she took his hand anyway, grateful for the rescue. As he led her to the cleared space serving as a dance floor, she murmured, "Thank you." I wasn't sure how to decline without hurting his feelings. Caleb will survive the disappointment, Owen said with a smile. Though I can't blame him for asking. You look lovely tonight. Susannah felt herself blush. She had worn her best dress, a blue cotton that matched her eyes, with lace at the collar that she'd carefully mended. Thank you, she said, suddenly shy as Owen's hand settled respectfully at her waist for the dance. They moved together surprisingly well for 2 people who rarely interacted beyond mealtime conversations. Owen was light on his feet despite his tall frame, and Susannah found herself relaxing into the dance, enjoying the simple pleasure of movement and music. You're a good dancer, Owen remarked. I'm guessing you had more formal occasions back east than we manage out here. My father insisted on dancing lessons, Susannah admitted. He said a lady should always know how to comport herself in society. Wise man, Owen replied. Though I imagine he never envisioned you dancing under Wyoming stars with a bunch of cowboys. Susannah laughed a genuine laugh that surprised her with its freedom. No, I don't believe that was what he had in mind for his only daughter. As the evening progressed, Susannah danced with several of the hands, finding each to be respectful and even charming in their rough way. But it was Owen she kept finding herself watching when she thought no one would notice. There was something compelling about the way he interacted with his men, never condescending, always attentive. They clearly respected him not because he owned the ranch, but because he had earned their loyalty. Later, as the celebration wound down and men began drifting toward the bunkhouse, Owen walked Susannah to her cabin. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. A comfortable silence stretched between them until they reached her door. "Thank you for tonight," Owen said. "You gave the men a real taste of home." "I enjoyed it," Susannah replied truthfully. "It's been a long time since I felt part of something like this." Owen's gaze was warm in the lantern light. "You are part of things here, Susannah. More than you might realize." He hesitated, then added, "I hope you'll stay on. Beyond the summer, I mean." The invitation caught her off guard. "You want me to stay through winter? I want you to stay, period," Owen said simply. "The men are happier, the ranch runs smoother. And—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've come to value your presence here very much." Susannah's heart quickened. "Owen, you don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "Just know the option is there." He tipped his hat. "Good night, Susannah." "Good night, Owen," she replied, watching as he walked back toward the main house, his tall figure silhouetted against the starlit sky. Inside her cabin, Susannah sat on the edge of her bed, thoughts tumbling over one another. Owen's invitation to stay indefinitely stirred feelings she'd thought long buried: hope, possibility, perhaps even the beginnings of something like happiness. But caution held her back. She had trusted once before, built her life around a man, only to be discarded when she failed to fulfill her primary purpose as a wife. Could she risk that pain again? And was Owen offering more than just continued employment? The questions kept her awake long into the night. The weeks that followed brought subtle changes to Susannah's relationship with Owen. Nothing improper occurred. He was unfailingly respectful of her position and privacy, but there were small moments that suggested something deeper developing between them. He began stopping by the kitchen just to talk, sometimes bringing wildflowers he'd spotted on his rounds of the ranch. Occasionally, they would sit on the porch of the main house after dinner, watching the sunset and discussing books they'd read or places they'd seen. One evening in mid-August, as they sat drinking coffee, Owen broached a subject they'd both been carefully avoiding. "Harvest Dance is coming up in Sheridan next month," he said, keeping his tone casual. "Ranch always sends a delegation. Good for community relations." Susannah tensed. The thought of returning to Sheridan, facing the whispers and stares, made her stomach clench. "I'm sure you and the men will represent the ranch admirably." Owen studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. "Actually, I was hoping you might consider attending. With me." The invitation hung in the air between them. Susannah set down her cup to hide the trembling of her hands. "As your cook?" she asked, needing clarification. "No," Owen said quietly. "As my companion, my guest." He met her gaze directly. "There's been talk, Susannah, about us." "What kind of talk?" she asked, though she could guess. A single woman living on a ranch, growing visibly friendly with the owner, of course there would be gossip. "The usual kind," Owen replied with a slight shrug. "Some of it unkind. I'd like to put it to rest by making my intentions clear." Susannah's breath caught. "And what are your intentions, Owen?" He set his coffee aside and leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I respect you, Susannah. Your strength, your dignity in the face of how Thomas treated you. I enjoy your company more than anyone else's. And I find myself thinking about you when you're not around." He paused. "I'm not proposing marriage, not yet. That would be too soon for both of us, but I would like to court you properly if you're willing." Susannah felt dizzy with conflicting emotions, hope warring with fear, attraction battling caution. "Owen, you know my situation. What Thomas cast me aside for. I can never give you children." Owen's expression softened. "Susannah, there are many ways to create a family. Blood isn't the only thing that binds people together." He reached across the space between them, offering his hand. "I've seen how you've brought life back to this ranch. How the men look forward to gathering at meals now, how even Miguel smiles more since you came. Family is what we make it." Tears blurred Susannah's vision. She had been defined by her failure for so long that Owen's words felt like rain on parched earth. Hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Of what people will say," he asked gently. "Of being hurt again," she answered truthfully. "Of letting myself hope." Owen's fingers tightened around hers. "I can't promise we'll never face hardship. That's not the way life works, especially out here. But I can promise I'll never make you face it alone." The harvest dance loomed like both promise and threat as September began. Susannah had agreed to attend with Owen, though her anxiety grew as the date approached. She had nothing suitable to wear. For one thing, her few dresses were serviceable for ranch life, but hardly appropriate for what would be, in effect, her first public appearance as Owen Eastman's chosen companion. Owen solved this problem with characteristic thoughtfulness. 2 weeks before the dance, he returned from a supply run to Sheridan with a large package wrapped in brown paper. "Mrs. Preston at the dress shop helped me," he explained as Susannah unwrapped the bundle to reveal rich burgundy fabric, along with lace, buttons, and all the notions needed to create a new dress. "I remembered you mentioned you could sew. I thought perhaps." "It's beautiful," Susannah said, touched beyond words by the gesture. The fabric was finer than anything she'd owned even during her marriage. "Thank you, Owen." In the evenings after her kitchen duties were completed, Susannah worked on the dress by lamplight in her cabin. The familiar rhythm of needle and thread was soothing, and as the garment took shape, so too did her resolve to face Sheridan with her head held high. The night of the dance arrived clear and cool, with autumn painting the hills in shades of gold and russet. Susannah took extra care with her appearance, arranging her chestnut hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical bun. When she emerged from her cabin, Owen was waiting beside the buggy, dressed in his best suit. The look of appreciation in his eyes as he took in her appearance gave Susannah courage she hadn't known she possessed. "You are a vision," he said simply, helping her into the buggy. The journey to Sheridan passed too quickly. Before Susannah was fully prepared, they were pulling up outside the town hall where lanterns glowed and music spilled into the night. Owen helped her down, then offered his arm. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Susannah took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." Their entrance caused exactly the stir Susannah had dreaded. Conversations faltered, heads turned, and whispers immediately began circulating. But Owen's steady presence beside her gave her strength. He guided her through the crowd with confidence, stopping to introduce her to acquaintances as if there was nothing unusual about their arrangement. "Owen, good to see you," called a distinguished-looking man with gray at his temples. "And who is this lovely lady?" "Judge Parker," Owen greeted him warmly. "May I present Mrs. Susannah Collins? Susannah, Judge William Parker is an old friend of my father's." The judge's eyes widened slightly at her name, but his manners were impeccable. "A pleasure, Mrs. Collins. I hope you're enjoying your evening." "Very much, thank you," Susannah replied, grateful for his courtesy. As they continued their circuit of the room, Susannah spotted a face that made her blood run cold. Thomas, standing with a group of businessmen near the refreshment table. He was staring at her and Owen with undisguised shock. Owen followed her gaze and his arm tightened protectively around hers. "We can leave if you'd prefer," he murmured. "No," Susannah said, surprising herself with her firmness. "I won't let him chase me away." The band struck up a waltz and Owen led her to the dance floor. As they moved together among the other couples, Susannah gradually relaxed, allowing herself to enjoy the music and Owen's steady guidance. For a few precious minutes, the rest of the room faded away, and it was just the two of them, as it had been that night under the stars at the ranch. The spell was broken when Thomas appeared beside them as the dance ended. "Susannah," he said stiffly. "Mr. Eastman." Owen nodded coolly. "Collins?" Thomas's gaze flickered between them, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. "I see you found employment," he said to Susannah, the implication in his tone unmistakable. Before she could respond, Owen spoke, his voice level but with steel underneath. "Mrs. Collins is indeed employed at my ranch as our cook. She is also my guest this evening, and I would appreciate you addressing her with the respect she deserves." Thomas flushed. "I'm simply concerned for her reputation." "Living alone among a group of men, my reputation," Susannah interrupted, finding her voice at last. "You destroyed my reputation in this town, Thomas. You made sure everyone knew of my failure." She straightened her shoulders. "But Mr. Eastman has shown me that my worth isn't measured by whether I can bear children." Thomas's expression hardened. "I see. Well, I wish you both happiness in your arrangement." He turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and Susannah, I'll be filing divorce papers next month, on grounds of abandonment. I thought you should know." As he walked away, Susannah felt a curious sense of relief rather than the shame she had expected. "He's really doing me a favor," she said to Owen. "Once the divorce is final, I'll truly be free." Owen studied her face. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said, and meant it. "Better than all right. For the first time in years, I feel like myself again." She smiled up at him. "Would you mind terribly if we left? Not because of Thomas, but because I'd rather spend the evening somewhere we can actually talk." Owen's smile was answer enough. He escorted her out of the hall, ignoring the curious glances that followed them. Outside, the night was brilliant with stars. Instead of returning directly to the ranch, Owen directed the buggy to a small rise overlooking the town. "I used to come here as a boy," he explained as he helped her down, "when town got too confining." They sat side by side on a fallen log, looking out over the twinkling lights of Sheridan below. The distant sound of the dance music floated up to them, mingling with the chorus of night insects. "Thank you for tonight," Susannah said after a comfortable silence. "For standing by me. For making me feel like I belong somewhere again." Owen took her hand gently. "You do belong, Susannah. With or without me, you have a place at the ranch for as long as you want it, but I hope—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I hope you might consider making it a more permanent arrangement, once your divorce is final, of course." Susannah's heart quickened. "Owen, are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife," he said simply. "Not now, that would be improper while you're still legally married, but someday, when you're ready." Tears filled Susannah's eyes, but they were tears of happiness rather than sorrow. "Even knowing I can't give you children, that there will never be an Eastman heir to carry on your name and inherit the ranch." Owen gently turned her face toward his. "Susannah, When I said there are many ways to create a family, I meant it. There are children in this territory who need homes, orphans, half Indian children no one wants, children of miners and settlers who didn't survive the winter. We could give them a home, a future. His blue eyes were earnest in the starlight. If you want that, if you want me. I do, Susannah whispered, realizing the truth of it as the words left her lips. I do want that, I do want you. Owen's smile was like sunrise. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, respectful of her still married status, but it held the promise of deeper passion to come. When they parted, Susannah felt as though something long broken inside her had begun to heal. We should get back to the ranch, Owen said, though he made no move to rise. The men will talk if we're gone too long, Susannah laughed softly. Owen, they're already talking, have been for weeks. He chuckled, the sound warming her like a physical touch. True enough. Jim asked me last week when I was going to make an honest woman of you. And what did you tell him? That it was none of his business, Owen replied, but also that I was working on it. The months that followed were among the happiest of Susannah's life. As winter descended on the Wyoming Territory, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a glistening wonderland, Susannah and Owen's courtship continued with a proper restraint that nevertheless failed to disguise their deepening feelings for one another. Thomas made good on his promise to file for divorce, though he tried to extract a settlement from Owen as the price of his cooperation. Owen paid it without complaint, considering it a small price for Susannah's freedom. Besides, he told her when she protested the expense, it's worth every penny to know you'll never have to see him again. The divorce became final in January 1879. The very next day, Owen formally proposed, presenting Susannah with a delicate gold ring that had belonged to his mother. I promised her before she died that I'd only give this to a woman worthy of wearing it, he told Susannah as he slipped it onto her finger. A woman with courage and kindness in equal measure. They married in February, with Judge Parker making the journey from Sheridan to perform the ceremony at the ranch. The bunkhouse was transformed with evergreen boughs and ribbon, and every hand employed by the Eastman ranch attended, along with neighboring ranchers and their families. Even Mrs. Hildebrand made the trip from town, telling Susannah gruffly that she'd known all along that girl had more gumption than the Collins family gave her credit for. Their wedding night was everything Susannah had never experienced in her first marriage: tender, passionate, and filled with genuine connection rather than mere duty. Owen treated her body as something precious, taking time to learn what pleased her rather than simply seeking his own satisfaction. By morning, Susannah understood for the first time why the marital bed was spoken of with such reverence in the Bible. Spring brought new life to the ranch and a new purpose to their marriage. Owen had not forgotten his promise about creating a family in unconventional ways. In April, they made a journey to a mission school near Cheyenne, where children of mixed heritage or those orphaned by disease and hardship were housed. We can't save them all, Owen cautioned as they approached the austere building, but we might make a difference for one or two. The mission director, a stern woman named Sister Agnes, regarded them suspiciously at first. Most folks who come here want strong boys to work their farms, she said bluntly, or fair-skinned girls who can pass for white. Which are you looking for? Neither, Susannah replied with equal directness. We're looking for children who need a home, who they are matters less than what they need. Sister Agnes's expression softened slightly. Well then, you'd better come meet them. There were 37 children at the mission, ranging from infants to teenagers. Some were full-blooded Indian children taken from their tribes. Others were mixed race with no place in either world, and still others were white children orphaned by the harsh realities of frontier life. Susannah's heart ached for all of them, but two in particular captured her attention. Emma was 8, a solemn-faced girl with honey-colored braids whose parents had both died of influenza the previous winter. She clung to the hand of 4-year-old Daniel, a half-Cheyenne boy with enormous dark eyes who hadn't spoken since being brought to the mission 6 months earlier. Sister Agnes explained that they weren't siblings by birth, but Emma had appointed herself Daniel's protector from the moment he arrived. "She reads to him every night," Sister Agnes said, a rare smile softening her features. "She's the only one he responds to at all." Watching Emma patiently show Daniel a picture book, Susannah felt something shift in her heart. She glanced at Owen and found him watching the children with the same expression of quiet certainty she felt. "Those two," he said simply. "They belong together, and I think they belong with us." The adoption process was not simple. There were papers to be filed, questions about their ability to provide for children of different backgrounds, and concerns about Daniel's failure to speak. But Owen's standing in the territory and Susannah's obvious devotion to the children eventually overcame all obstacles. By summer, Emma and Daniel were installed at the Eastman Ranch, gradually transforming from solemn, wary orphans to children who knew they were cherished. Emma blossomed under Susannah's gentle guidance, revealing a quick mind and natural aptitude for learning that had been stifled in the overcrowded mission school. Owen began teaching her to ride, delighting in her fearless approach to horsemanship. Daniel remained silent for weeks, watching everything with his huge dark eyes, but communicating only through gestures and expressions. Susannah never pressured him to speak, instead letting him follow her through her daily routines, involving him in simple tasks like gathering eggs or kneading bread dough. His first word, when it finally came, was "Mama," whispered as Susannah tucked him into bed one autumn evening. The ranch hands, who had initially regarded the children with awkward uncertainty, soon became devoted champions. Jim taught Emma to whittle, Pete showed Daniel how to whistle through a blade of grass, and Miguel presented them both with beautifully carved wooden animals he'd made during the quiet winter evenings. By Christmas 1879, the Eastman Ranch had been transformed. The main house, once a purely functional space for Owen's solitary life, now rang with children's laughter. Emma's drawings decorated the walls, Daniel's wooden toys scattered across the rugs, and the dining room table, once used primarily for Owen's business dealings, became the center of family meals and games. Susannah, watching her husband patiently teaching Daniel how to build a tower of blocks one snowy evening, felt a contentment she had never thought possible after Thomas's cruel rejection. Their family might not be conventional, but it was bound by something stronger than blood choice, commitment, and love freely given. Spring 1880 brought an unexpected development. Susannah, who had been feeling unusually tired, consulted the doctor during a trip to Sheridan. She returned to the ranch in a state of shocked disbelief. "Owen," she said that night after the children were asleep, "the doctor says I'm with child." Owen stared at her, joy and confusion battling in his expression. "But I thought we believed, so did I," Susannah said, her voice trembling. "The doctor says it happens sometimes, that whatever was wrong might have healed somehow, or perhaps the doctors in Sheridan were simply wrong about my condition." She looked at him anxiously. "Are you happy about this?" Owen gathered her into his arms, his embrace answering her question before his words did. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he murmured against her hair. "But Susannah, Even if this hadn't happened, even if it's some kind of miracle that never repeats, you have already given me a family beyond anything I could have hoped for." Their son was born that November, a healthy, robust boy they named William, after Judge Parker, who had married them and supported their unconventional family from the beginning. Emma appointed herself his guardian, just as she had with Daniel, and Daniel overcame his usual shyness to proudly announce to visitors that the baby was his brother. 2 years later, Susannah gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Elizabeth, defying all medical predictions about her fertility. The Eastman family continued to grow in other ways as well. When the territory established its first formal orphanage in Cheyenne, Owen and Susannah became regular visitors, eventually bringing home 3 more children who needed families. Robert, a 12-year-old with a gift for training horses; Mary, a shy 10-year-old who had lost her family in a fire; and Joseph, a half-Sioux infant whose mother had died in childbirth. By 1885, the Eastman Ranch had become known throughout the territory, not only for its fine cattle operation, but also for the remarkable family that called it home. Visitors were often startled to meet the diverse brood of children who tumbled out to greet them, some clearly the biological offspring of Owen and Susannah, others obviously adopted from various backgrounds, but all unmistakably Eastmans in their confidence and the secure knowledge that they were loved. In the summer of 1886, a letter arrived that Susannah had never expected to receive. It was from Thomas's sister Margaret, informing her that Thomas had died after a brief illness. The letter was stiffly formal until the final paragraph. "I feel I must tell you that Thomas expressed regret in his final days for how he treated you. He had heard of your new family and your apparent happiness. I believe he understood, too late, what he had thrown away. I hope this brings you some peace." Susannah shared the letter with Owen that night, sitting on the porch after the children were in bed. "Does it," he asked gently, "bring you peace?" Susannah considered the question carefully. "I think I found my peace long before this letter arrived," she said finally. "The day you told me there were many ways to create a family, the day I believed you." She reached for his hand. "Thomas's regret doesn't change my life now. But I'm glad for his sake that he found some understanding before the end." Owen nodded, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "You have more grace than most, Susannah Eastman." "I have more blessings than most," she corrected, looking toward the house where their children slept. "How could I be anything but gracious?" As twilight deepened into night, Susannah thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the shame and rejection she had faced in Sheridan to the abundant life she now lived. She had once believed that her worth as a woman was tied to her ability to bear children, a belief reinforced by her first husband and the society around her. But Owen had shown her a different truth, that family was created through love and choice, not just biology. The ranch was quiet now, the only sounds the gentle creaking of the porch swing and the distant lowing of cattle. Susannah leaned her head against Owen's shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him beside her. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me. The real me, not just what I could or couldn't do." Owen pressed a kiss to her temple. "I've always seen you, Susannah, from that first day by the river, a woman with enough courage to rebuild her life from ashes. How could I not fall in love with that?" As stars emerged in the vast Wyoming sky, Susannah Eastman closed her eyes in gratitude. She had been labeled barren and cast aside, but she had found her way to a life more fruitful than she could have imagined, not despite her struggles, but because of the strength they had forged in her. And beside her was the man who had seen that strength when she herself had almost forgotten it existed. In the years that followed, the Eastman Ranch prospered. as did the unconventional family that called it home. Emma eventually became the first woman in the territory to graduate from university, returning to Wyoming to establish a school that welcomed children regardless of background or heritage. Daniel, once so silent, grew into a man of few but powerful words, with a gift for storytelling that made him a beloved figure in the community. The biological children William, Sarah, Elizabeth, and two more who came later grew up alongside their adopted siblings with no sense of difference or division. To all of them, family meant the people who loved you, supported you, and believed in you, regardless of where you had begun. In 1895, for Owen and Susannah's 15th anniversary, their children, by then numbering 11, organized a celebration that brought together the entire community. Under a canopy of stars on a perfect June evening, surrounded by friends and their remarkable family, Owen raised a glass to his wife. "To Susannah," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering, "who taught me that the truest measure of wealth isn't in acres or cattle, but in the hearts we touch and the lives we share." Susannah, her chestnut hair now threaded with silver, smiled at the man who had given her not just a second chance at love, but a vision of family larger and more beautiful than she had ever dared to dream. "And to love," she added, raising her own glass, "which finds a way to bloom even in the harshest conditions if only we have the courage to nurture it." As their family and friends echoed the toast, Susannah met Owen's gaze across the table. In his eyes, she still saw the cowboy who had found her by the river all those years ago, the man who had recognized her strength when she herself had forgotten it, who had shown her that there were indeed many ways to create a family, and that the most powerful bonds were those freely chosen, day after day, through all the seasons of a life richly lived.